What does it really mean to be Mexican? For generations, that answer seemed pretty simple. But today, we're going to decode a much more complex and frankly surprising story. One that's written not in history books, but right there in the DNA of over 130 million people. For centuries, the entire identity of Mexico has been built around this one powerful idea: mestizo. You know, the blend born from the meeting of two worlds, indigenous America and Spain. It's the official story, the one that shaped a nation. But here's the thing. Modern genetics lets us look right past those cultural labels and read history directly from our DNA. And what it's showing us asks a pretty big question. Does this simple label really tell the whole story? Turns out, not even close. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to follow our first major clue, and it's a story that's been passed down generation after generation exclusively from mother to child. We can trace this story using something called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA for short. Think of it like a genetic signature that follows a completely unbroken maternal line. It connects you directly to your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, and on, all the way back through thousands of years. So when scientists analyzed the mtDNA of the modern Mexican population, the results were, well, they were staggering. They found that nearly 90% of all maternal lineages in Mexico are of indigenous American origin. Not half, nearly all of them. This is the genetic bedrock. And we're not just talking about a recent connection here. This genetic thread ties the vast majority of modern Mexicans directly to the very first people who settled the continent. I mean, we have archaeological sites like the Cueva del Chiquihuite and the Mujer del Peñón remains right in Mexico City that show people were there tens of thousands of years ago. Okay, so if the mother's story is overwhelmingly indigenous, that creates a fascinating puzzle, right? We know there's significant European ancestry in Mexico. So where did it come from? Well, the answer lies in a completely different set of genes. And here it is. This is the core twist in Mexico's genetic history. While the maternal DNA is almost entirely indigenous, the paternal DNA, the stuff passed from father to son through the Y chromosome, tells the exact opposite story. It's predominantly European, anywhere from about 50 to nearly 90%. So, what's going on here? Well, this stark genetic imbalance isn't random. It's a direct reflection of the colonial period. It tells a clear story of what geneticists call directional mating, which is basically a pattern where immigrant European men were the ones having children with local indigenous women. And the historical records back this up perfectly. During Mexico's colonial era, you had about 250,000 European settlers arrive, and the vast majority of them, they were men. This created the exact conditions for this specific genetic pattern to emerge. But hold on, the story doesn't end there. That simple narrative of just two ancestral groups, it completely overlooks another crucial layer to Mexico's heritage, a chapter that, for a long time, has been almost forgotten. Yep, beyond the indigenous and European stories, a third vital element was woven into Mexico's genetic fabric. And for a long time, as this quote points out, this contribution was largely forgotten in popular culture. But the genetic evidence, well, it's undeniable. Back in the 16th and 17th centuries, over 200,000 enslaved Africans were brought to Mexico. Now, this was a massive influx of people. They were brought to replace the native labor force that had been just decimated by European diseases. In fact, for a while during this early period, the African population was actually larger than the European one. And you can see their legacy written right in the genes of modern Mexicans. If we look back at that maternal DNA again, we see that about 2 to 5% of those lineages trace directly back to sub-Saharan Africa. And while the number is smaller, their genetic footprint is an undeniable part of the national story. So when we put all these genetic clues together, the mother's story, the father's story, and this forgotten story, we can start to paint a new and way more accurate portrait of the Mexican people. So you see, it's not a simple 50-50 mix. Not at all. It's this incredibly complex tapestry. It's defined by 3 major ancestral roots. You've got this profound indigenous foundation from the maternal side, a strong paternal overlay from Europe, and then this significant African thread woven throughout the entire population. And this genetic landscape isn't uniform. The mix changes dramatically depending on the region. In the south of Mexico, indigenous ancestry is at its highest.
But as you head north, European ancestry becomes more and more dominant. It's a true genetic mosaic that reflects centuries of different local histories.
And this brings us right back to where we started. All this diversity highlights why a single term like mestizo, as culturally important as it is, just can't capture the full genetic reality. Some researchers have even called it genetically pointless because it kind of erases that deep indigenous foundation and the African contribution, oversimplifying a really rich and varied history.
Ultimately, our DNA doesn't define our culture or our identity. But what it does give us is this unvarnished account of our history, a story of ancient migrations, colonial encounters, and incredible resilience. And it leaves us with a final thought to consider. Now that we can read this complex story in our genes, how does it shape the story we choose to tell about ourselves?